Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, from How the Great Religions Began by Joseph Gaer. Part 4, Mohammedanism. So you can tell by that title there's going to be some stuff made up that's not part of here, but anyways. Flaming Sword of the Desert. Muhammad said, when God created the creation, he wrote a book, which is near him upon the heavenly throne. And in this book it is written, verily, my love overcometh my anger. And that's the illustration from the book. Mohammedanism, Flaming Sword of the Desert. 1. Legend of the Sacred City. Long, long ago, so the Arabian story tells, in the days when Abraham, son of Terah, was still alive, he had a wife named Sarah, and another named Hagar. Sarah had a son, and Hagar had a son. And the two wives of Abraham were jealous of each other. One day, Sarah, who was Abraham's favorite wife, said to her husband, Abraham, I want you to promise me that my son Isaac shall be your heir and successor. It shall be as you say, Abraham promised. Hagar despises me and hopes that her son Ishmael will grow up to be your heir. Promise me to send Hagar and her son away. Abraham replied, I promise. The next morning Abraham woke very early and sent Hagar and Ishmael away from home. Hagar, carrying the small boy on her shoulders, wandered far into the desert near the Red Sea until she became very tired and very thirsty. Hagar seated herself on a rock and wept in fear that she and her child would die of thirst in the desert. As she sat there weeping, her little boy Ishmael kicked the sand in great anger. At the exact spot where he kicked the earth, a spring of fresh water suddenly gushed out of the desert sand. When Abraham learned of the miracle that had happened to his son Ishmael in the desert, he came to the spring and near it built a temple. In the eastern part of the temple, he set the black stone he had inherited from his forefathers, which Adam, the first man on earth, had brought with him from the Garden of Eden. Near the temple called the Kaaba, close to the spring of Ishmael, called the Zemzem, Hagar and her son remained. There Ishmael grew up, and there he raised a large family. And the children and grandchildren of Ishmael built around the sacred temple their sacred city, Mecca. Of course, in the Bible it's called Becca, and there's details that aren't here about Becca, particularly in the Hagarite Psalm. And there is another story that long before Ishmael was born, long before Abraham was born, even 2,000 years before the world was created, the Kaaba had already been built in heaven when Adam, the first, was driven out of the Garden of Eden for doing something he ought not to have done. He built on earth another Kaaba, cube, like the one above, exactly under the heavenly Kaaba. And it was not far from the Kaaba Adam built that Ishmael kicked open the Zemzem, the sacred well. About these two holy places grew up the sacred city called Mecca. The offspring of Ishmael multiplied and began to spread out east to the Persian Gulf, north towards the Mediterranean Sea, and south to the Gulf of Aden. But no matter how far they traveled, and no matter where they settled, Mecca remained to them the sacred city of their land. To Mecca, city of God, they came on pilgrimages to worship at the Kaaba, to kiss the black stone handed down from Adam, and to drink the sacred waters of the well Ishmael. Of course, kissing the stone is not an obligation of pilgrimage, and you're not supposed to struggle through the crowd and cause strife or hurt people to do such. That's not right. The children of Israel, son of Isaac, son of Abraham, had multiplied into the race called Jews. The children of Ishmael, son of Hagar, and Abraham multiplied into the race called Arabs. Well, Israelites. Not just the Jews, but the Israelites. 2. The religion of the Arabs. Like all people of long ago, the Arabs of long ago were nature worshippers, and they worshipped the sun and the stars and the spirits of the sun and the stars. They also worshipped the memory of their forefathers, Abraham and Ishmael, and in Mecca, near the sacred temple, they set up idols too, which they worshipped. They had 360 idols, one for each day in their year. The Arab year has only 360 days. I don't know what Arab year, but a lot of calendars had 360 days and, like 5 or 6 intercalculary days. But there was a ring of 360 idols, the degree idols as they may be called. The most important of these was Habal, an idol made in the form of a man, chiseled out of red agate, with one hand made of gold. Above the nature gods, spirits, and idols, they worshipped Allah Ta'ala, the Most High God. Though they recognized Allah Ta'ala as the Most High God, they paid more attention to the stars and to the idols. They did not all worship the same idols. Arabia in those days was divided into many clans and tribes, and each tribe had idols and beliefs of its own. The tribes often fought each other fiercely and derided each other's beliefs, yet they felt related to each other in their common ancestry. Because of its geographical position, Arabia was at no time in history oppressed by the great powers of East and West. The ambition of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome never fell too heavily upon the land of the Arabs, nor have these conquering nations of the past ever brought to Arabia their knowledge and civilization. Arabia was left alone to its ignorance, to its fierce tribal wars, and to its confusion of religious beliefs. The land teemed with beliefs in sacred stones, sacred palms, and sacred hills. From time to time, rumors spread over the land about the discovery of a hill, or a heap of stones, or a grove of trees that had healing powers or brought good luck. The belief in the power of these sacred places was so great in Arabia that sometimes an Arab would travel for hundreds of miles over the treacherous desert to a newly discovered spot which travelers had reported was sacred. And all Arabs everywhere firmly believed in the holiness of Mecca, where the Kaaba and the well of Ishmael. Arabia was known as the land of incense, and Mecca was its marketplace. On their pilgrimage to the sacred temple, the Arabs brought with them incense and spices and perfumes to be sold or exchanged in the marketplaces of Mecca. In that way, they combined religion with business. Naturally, the rich merchants of Mecca profited by the arrival of the stream of pilgrims, whose products they bought. And they encouraged the pilgrims to come often to their city, telling them that their trip alone would bring them good luck. In time, the merchants of Mecca claimed that the well of Ishmael was their private property and began to sell its waters to the worshippers. But ignorant as the Arabians were, they began to doubt whether there could be any holiness in water sold as merchandise. If there is no holiness in the waters of the Zemzem, the pilgrims said, how much holiness can there be in all these idols and images? Very little, many thought. Though they were silent, slowly they lost faith in the powers of the waters of the Zemzem, in the holiness of the Kaaba, and the divinity of their idols. With their belief in holy things crumbling, the Arabs turned to gambling, drinking, and fortune-telling. Look at what's happening in America. Had they been highly civilized people in those days, they might have turned to science and invention, but they were ignorant, and nothing stirs the hearts of the ignorant more than the hope of learning what their future holds for them. They think of the future as something hidden in a mysterious place, which if only people could discover the secret, they might be permitted to look into and see all that is going to happen to them. The secret of the Arabs The secret the Arabs attempted to discover through stargazing, through signs in the air, by dissecting birds and mice, or by walking in circles, or by drawing lots. The drawing of lots led to gambling. Gambling led to various degrading practices. Many Jews who came to Arabia after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans preached to them of the teachings of Judaism. Later, Christian missionaries arrived to spread among the Arabs the gospel of Jesus. The Arabs would listen to neither. They were interested only in their business, horsemanship, poetry contest, and the pleasures of wine and gambling. And it was interesting to note that aside from seeking out being there for the fulfillment of certain prophecies in Tanakh, that certain forms of Judaism happened in the Arabian Peninsula that did not happen elsewhere. Chapter 3. Shepherd into merchant. In the year 570, when gambling and drunkenness and strange superstition ruled the minds of the Arabs, a child was born into the home of one of the aristocratic families in Mecca. He was named Muhammad. Among the Arabs, there are many, many tales of what took place during Muhammad's childhood. There is one story that when Muhammad was born, all the idols in the world trembled and tumbled from their pedestals. And another story tells that when the child Muhammad opened his eyes for the first time, he lifted them towards heaven and exclaimed, La ilaha illallah Muhammadar Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. Of course, that's spurious according to what the prophet taught and the other narrations about his childhood. How can it be a surprise? Oh, he was already claiming to be a prophet when he was an infant. No. Nobody who was there testified to that. But all we actually know of Muhammad's childhood is that at the age of 6 he had lost his father and his mother and was taken into the home of one of his uncles, Abu Talib. As soon as Muhammad was old enough to look after a flock of sheep, he was hired out as a shepherd's helper, and out on the edge of the desert, Muhammad spent his childhood and early years herding sheep to earn his bread and shelter. The desert was his school, and the sun by day and the stars on clear nights were his teachers. As he grew older, Muhammad left the herding sheep and became a camel driver. Through the desert, he led caravans laden with Arabia's products that were to be sold in the markets of Egypt in the west, Persia in the east, and Syria in the north. Muhammad's reputation as a caravan leader gained him favor among the merchants of Mecca. A wealthy widow, Khadija by name, employed him through her agents, and Muhammad was sent with a caravan laden with spices and perfumes to Syria. Entrusted with the sale of this merchandise and the purchase and exchange of silk and linen, Muhammad returned from the journey in due time and immediately went to render an account to the widow Khadija. Khadija was 40 years old and the mother of 3 children, but when Muhammad saw her for the first time in her home, he was greatly surprised by her youthful appearance and her beauty. Even more surprised was Khadija at the appearance of Muhammad, and who had been employed at her services, but whom she now met for the first time. Though Muhammad was not very tall, he was so broad-shouldered that he appeared like a giant. He had curly black hair and a curly beard, and from between his lips, the whiteness of his teeth was dazzling. He came forward to Khadija with a quick step and bowed graciously. As soon as Muhammad began to speak, Khadija was aware that never before had she heard a voice as musical as his, and though Muhammad spoke of merchandise, of sales and profits, and of hardships in the desert, his sentences were as rhythmic as the poems of the famed Labid. Muhammad concluded his account of his first trip as Khadija's representative and returned home. That same afternoon, messengers came to him and asked, "What is it, Muhammad, that keeps you from marrying?" "Too poor am I, neighbors." Muhammad replied, "Not until my fortune is secure will I marry." But if a rich and worthy woman sought your hand in marriage, what would be your answer then, O Muhammad? And what might be her name? Khadijah, the messengers replied. Khadijah, I would marry whenever she consents. Muhammad exclaimed happily. So, at the age of 25, Muhammad, camel driver of the deserts of Arabia, married Khadijah, a wealthy widow of Mecca. And through his marriage, the poor camel driver became one of the richest merchants of Mecca. And it's important to note that all the messenger prophets, all the exemplar prophets, the Nabi, Anbiya, the Nabiyim, the Anbiya, biblical language, Arabic, is, that they were hand laborers, herdsmen of animals, because they were supposed to have lessons that people could follow. Number 4, merchant into prophet. For 15 years, Muhammad lived happily with Khadijah, increasing their wealth and gaining the respect of the people of Mecca. But the thought of mixed idolatry of his people, and of the great drunkenness and gambling in the land, greatly depressed Muhammad, and he often wondered what could be done to improve the conditions of his countrymen. As a camel driver, Muhammad had learned much of the teachings of Judaism and Christianity from the many Jews and Christians he had met and talked with in the market places of Syria and Persia and Egypt. Muhammad had never learned to read and write, but after his marriage, his wife's cousin, Waraka, who had accepted the Jewish faith, often read the Bible to him. And there is no indication of this. This is something that's a modern invention. When the New Testament was read to Muhammad, the story of Jesus convinced him that what his country, Arabia, needed was an inspired prophet and leader who would rouse the Arabs to faith in one God and who would lead them from their evil practices to the ways of the good life. The teachings of the Testaments, new and old, were now always in Muhammad's mind. Muhammad began leaving the city for the hills surrounding Mecca, and there he spent many hours brooding over the conditions of his country and how they might be changed for the better through prophetic leadership. And if Muhammad was just a grand compiler, you think he would have copied some of the errors, would have formed contradictions, but people like Joseph Gaer needed a theory in their mind to deny the prophethood. So they go to these lengths, inventing things. One day, as Muhammad sat reflecting on the fate of his people, it seemed to him that an angel came and stood before him and said, I am the angel Gabriel. And the angel showed him a golden tablet and commanded, read. I cannot read, said Muhammad. Read, the angel commanded again, and Muhammad, who had never learned to read, read, and who wasn't a reciter, by the way, there's also the meaning there. O thou who art wrapped, rise up and mourn, and thy Lord magnify, and thy raiment purify, and abominations shun, and grant not favors to gain increase, and wait for thy Lord. So, different chapters. This is the second or third chapter that's being quoted from that was learned by Prophet Muhammad. The golden tablet, he was shown a book. I don't remember any narrations that said it was golden, but people like to embellish things. But that's not good with religion. Never do that. Say nothing rather than add details. This and more was written on the golden tablet in the hands of the angel Gabriel. When the visions of the angel and the tablet faded away, Muhammad hurried home and told his wife of his strange experience. Khadijah believed that her husband had actually spoken with an angel, and she encouraged him to go out into the foothills again and await new revelations from heaven. Muhammad obeyed her, and again he imagined that the angel Gabriel appeared, each time with a new message from heaven. Slowly, the idea that he was a prophet chosen by God grew upon Muhammad, and he began to preach to his family and relatives. After gaining several followers among his immediate family, Muhammad went out to the sacred temple to preach to the people who had gathered to worship the idols. He rose before them, grave and dignified, and slightly trembling with excitement. He began, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. What sign have you that there is no God but Allah, and that you are his prophet?" Many in the audience demanded scornfully. Muhammad was very sensitive to ridicule, and he blushed in confusion at the question. Again, another made-up detail. These Christians don't want you to read the older versions of the story, even though it was written by fellow Jews and Christians early on. At the question, no, he was not confused at the question. But he thought it best to continue the messages he had brought to his people and to ignore the scoffers. Muhammad raised his voice and, in short, rhythmic sentences, began to tell the stories of their forefather Abraham and how he destroyed the idols in his father's house in the land of the Chaldees. "What sign have you that there is no God but Allah, and that you are his prophet?" Muhammad was interrupted again. Many who were present began to laugh and to shout, "Give us a sign that there is no God but Allah. Show us a miracle." Muhammad's forehead became covered with perspiration, and then he answered in an impassioned, fiery voice, "Ye who seek signs and miracles, behold, it is Allah who raised the heavens without pillars, that ye can see, that he ascended the throne and subdued the sun and the moon, and it is he who spread out the earth and put thereon firm mountains and flowing rivers. Ye who seek signs and miracles, by the daybreak and by the night that cometh on, by the sun and its rising brightness, by the morning and by the pilgrims that it hurt, and by the morning, and okay, let's skip the page. Okay, that's all. And the afternoon, by the fig tree and by the olive, and the date. Verily in that are signs for you to reflect. O believers, I will not worship that which ye worship. Say, Allah is one God, and there is not anyone like unto him. So that's a jumble of parts of verses and stories put together. It kind of sounded a little bit different, but there goes that part. 5. The years of struggle. After his first sermon to the people, Muhammad came again and again to preach whenever the Spirit moved him. The belief in one God grew within his mind, and he rose before the people near the sacred temple and poured his message in burning eloquence into the cold ears of the unbelievers. They laughed at him good-humoredly. "There goes the man who claims to know what goes on in heaven," they shouted when they saw him coming, and when he began to preach, they made sport of him and sang loud, vulgar songs. Still, Muhammad ignored them and went on with his preaching so long as Muhammad only urged them to turn away from idol worship to the belief in one God, Allah. As long as Muhammad only urged them to turn from idol worship to the belief in one God, Allah, the people of Mecca permitted Muhammad to continue his preaching. Not that simple, actually. The belief in Allah Ta'ala was not foreign to them, and Muhammad's admonitions about their gambling, drinking, and spending much time in fortune-telling only amused them. Well, it threatened their income, some of them people. But Muhammad did not stop with attacks on idolatry, drunkenness, and gambling. He began to preach against the rich merchants and leaders in Mecca, who used the well of Ishmael and the temple of the Kaaba as sources of profit. The merchants and rich men, who up to that time had ignored Muhammad's sermons, were incensed at such attacks and sent messengers to Muhammad's family, warning them to stop Muhammad from preaching any more against the corruption of the rich. Muhammad, when told about the rich men's warning, replied, "Not even if you set the sun against me on my right hand and the moon on my left hand would I leave my mission." And he went on preaching. For years, Muhammad persisted in preaching beliefs that were really a mixture of the old beliefs of the Arabs, Judaism, and Christianity, and his own ideas of reform. Well, this is the terms of the disbeliever. There's more to it than that. He wasn't just accepting, here's a Jewish or Christian way, let's kind of mix these together. There's no sign that he was acting that way. And his own ideas of reform, a very small group of followers had attached themselves to him during these years, and these followers he taught his religion, which he called Islam, meaning submission to the commands of Allah. His followers he called Muslims, Muslimin, Muslim, moon, meaning true believers. The sermons or speeches which Muhammad made were written down by one of his followers, Abu Bakr, and these Muslims read whenever they gathered, and with these sermons, which they claimed were revelations to Muhammad by God, through the angel Gabriel, they tried to attract followers. And Muhammad didn't write down his sermons. People didn't write down his sermons as such until later, and those were passed on, but those were different than Quran. And everybody knew it by the style, and because they were told, this is Quran. The leaders and rich people of Mecca still watched Muhammad's every step, and as soon as they suspected that the numbers of his followers were increasing, they passed a law that any man who accepted Islam should be driven out of Mecca. Muhammad went on preaching, but people did not want to risk being driven away from their homes, and they dared not accept Muhammad's religion. Khadijah, Muhammad's ever-faithful comforter, died, and Muhammad was grief-stricken. Still he went on preaching, but depressed by his failure to get his people of his own city to abandon gambling and their other evil ways, Muhammad decided to go to Ta'if, a city 70 miles away from Mecca, and spread his teachings there. Ta'if was the center of a wide grape country, and the grape growers and wine merchants hated Muhammad for his teachings against drinking. Well, all intoxicants, but they're concerned with drinking. No sooner had Muhammad began to preach in their city than the merchants attacked him and drove him out with stones. Muhammad returned to Mecca, and he went on preaching. One day, 12 pilgrims from Yathrib, a city about 270 miles away from Mecca, came to Muhammad and asked him to explain his teachings to them. In Yathrib, there were many Jews, and from them the pilgrims had heard about their belief in one God and this hatred of idols. When Muhammad preached to these people from Yathrib, they could easily understand him. To them, Muhammad said, "My teachings are simple. Allah is one God." Allah is the singular definitive term for God in Arabic that all monotheist or even monotheistic people like Christians would use. And Muhammad is his prophet, not just some person who tells the future and makes predictions, a sent one of God, a exemplar prophet of God. Give up idolatry. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not slander, and never become intoxicated. If you follow these teachings, then you follow Islam. The next year, 75 pilgrims from Yathrib came to Muhammad, asking to accept them into his religion. From among these, Muhammad chose 12 men, appointed them his apostles, and told them to return to Yathrib and spread Islam. The people of Mecca found out that Muhammad was trying to gain following in Yathrib, and they carefully worked out a plan to kill him before he had the chance to spread his teachings any further. But on the night they planned to kill him, Muhammad fled from Mecca on his favorite camel, Al-Qaswa, and escaped to Yathrib. That night, on which Muhammad fled to Yathrib, is the most important date in the religion of Islam and is now remembered as the Hegira, the night of the flight. Al-Hijra, the 23rd of the 9th month, 1438 is the date now.